Mauro, thank you for taking the time today. Today we're coming together to talk about your research. So you're doing a joint PhD with the University of Messina and with the Maastricht University, and you're investigating psychedelics as a potential treatment for chronic pain. So the first thing that's interesting to me is how you came to this project. So was it from personal relevance? Was it that the opportunity opened itself, or was it the universe aligning and you were already deep into it and then the opportunity opened itself?
Well, long story short, I was always interested in the effects that mind can have on the body, and I was interested in this since I was in my bachelor's degree. And at the time, I was learning lots of stuff about psychology, but I also quickly realized that what the university back in Milan was giving me was high-quality education, but unfortunately was very low on practical applications of those notions. So like as a student, I kind of panicked. I wanted to start working as soon as possible with people, and I stumbled upon hypnosis, which is an altered state of consciousness, a special state of consciousness in which I quickly realized most of the literature, of the scientific literature, dealt with how could pain be modulated through a different state of consciousness. And that, at the time I was a young student, it blew my mind. So I started studying hypnosis and working with both chronic pain patients and patients suffering from high degree of mental pain, like borderline personality disorder patients or high impulsiveness patients, people whose degree of mental pain were leading them to high degree of suicidality and self-harm, basically. So those were the first seeds that connected me to chronic pain and mental pain, which we know also on the neurological side share many brain networks and more generally many systems. So that's how everything was born. And 13 years into my career as a cognitive psychotherapist and hypnotherapist, I started getting interested in other ways to engender altered states of consciousness. And that's how I got to psychedelics. And from then on, basically what happened was that I felt that pain was going to be a big topic in the community. I had a clinical expertise that I could put to the service of the research. So I wrote a project, Kim Kuipers picked it up, she liked it, and I secured funding from Italy and started working on this field, psychedelics for chronic pain, which sounds super cool, and it holds tons of promise for these patients.
That's really interesting. Also, what you mentioned with the connection between the mind and the body, I think that's something we'll go deeper throughout the course of the conversation, because that was also the main, let's say, dichotomy I was grappling with while reading your papers. Is where is this coming from? But before we go into that, I would like to ask you a maybe somewhat silly question, but what is pain?
So this question is at the same time very silly, very basic, but also it's at the heart of everything we do. Because one of the things that baffled the early researchers that were dealing with pain is that they thought that pain was not measurable. So that pain was something that was elusive in a way. So much so that for a long time, especially at the beginning of last century, the idea was that there were some people who felt pain that had no medical cause, and they were stigmatized for that in different kinds of way. Obviously, there is a classic stigmatization that you may have heard several times, like this person doesn't actually have real pain. This person is quote-unquote faking it. Nobody expresses it this way, but the implication is that. Or explanations that referred more to mental health issue in a non-positive way. That person is quote-unquote crazy, so she feels things that aren't there, and that's how we should treat them, basically. As I was saying, it baffled the researchers at the beginning because it wasn't measurable. It was only in the later part of the last century and in the beginning of the 2000s that we basically fully embraced the concept that pain is measurable. And the most reliable way to measure it is asking people how much pain they feel. And that is enough, because there is no more reliable measure than what the person is really experiencing. And we know that the body can produce pain not necessarily out of medical causes, but also out of psychological causes. That's how the whole field of the study of mental pain started coming to the forefront back in the 90s. And we know that the same organic damage can generate very different levels of pain based on the person. And crucially, that those levels of pain are severely impacted upon by psychological factors, such as anxiety, pain catastrophism, levels of depression, and also issues more related to existential planes, so existential levels, such as how do I see my life now that I have this chronic pain, or more generally, how do I see my life based on what my history was, my family history was, the way that I represent myself, my sense of identity, basically. So to answer your question, I would say that pain is a complex perception that is made up of clearly physical sensations, sometimes justified by biological damage. But it is also a profoundly emotional and existential experience which calls into question our sense of identity. And especially in the clinical field, to the extent that you are able to keep all this complexity present in your work, you will be able to help these people achieve a more satisfying lifestyle, get back on the tracks that make them who they are. I don't know if this answers your question, Steven. What do you think?
It does. It certainly provides more clarity. It came to me also because I was thinking about the idea of catharsis and how people can experience very intense emotions, but they frame it in a different way. So intense emotions, but also intense pain, perhaps. But by framing it in a way that gives it a certain, let's say, directionality, so it's not just there and locked in a place and not moving, but you're progressing somewhere, it makes it a completely different sensation. So there's also these, for example, Kambo ceremonies where people, they burn these little holes in their arm and then they take this, I think it's also frog medicine, frog poison, and then they have a really intense sensation of feeling very hot, having to vomit, maybe all these things, but they frame it as a purification, which then I guess it's also painful, but gives it a directionality. So maybe also, again, talking about the concept of pain, where do you see this on the spectrum of, let's say, the flow of the sensation?
What you're saying is central to the psychological treatment of pain. And if I may, I will talk to you about some clinical examples that exemplify this process that you're talking about. Mm-hmm. What your question points at is that the interpretation of pain has a big impact on how we perceive pain, not only in terms of its emotional consequences, but also in terms of the level of pain that the person is actually perceiving. Since I've been working with hypnosis for a long time, and since people are starting to catch up with the idea that you can actually do stuff with your mind to make your body feel better, many people with pain started asking for help to me as a hypnotherapist and to several colleagues. And I remember especially the case of this woman who was suffering from migraines. And they were so invalidating that sometimes she basically had to spend several days in her house with her curtains closed, because as you may know, the sight of the light can really exacerbate the symptoms. And by working with hypnosis, we went back to a moment in which she had and I'm telling this story as if it was just one session that solved everything. It is more complex than that. It is more a journey. We went back to that time several times to carry on the work, kind of like what happens with psychedelic integration, in which you have a very intense experience in one session, and then you keep working on those issues. You keep fast forwarding, let's say, you keep forwarding the process in the subsequent session. So what happens was that this pain in her head suddenly became like a heavy veil that was covering her brain and was preventing her to see. That was her impression. So by working with hypnosis, we started making this veil this textile more movable. We made it softer. We used her own hands to start to pull out this texture from. I know this may sound weird to someone who has never worked with the different states of consciousness, but what the patient's experience was that she was removing this texture from the space between the brain and the skull. And the anatomists that will listen to this will scream at the recording, I'm sure, but she was removing it, and slowly she felt this sense of lightness in her head, this sense of space in her head, this sense of relief in her head. And mind that she wasn't having a migraine attack while we were doing this, because when the attack is active, there is really little you can do to focus your attention on something unless you were trained before. So the effects of this work wasn't that the migraine completely go away, of course. I mean, that would be amazing, etc. But she started feeling that when the initial symptoms of the attack were coming, she would do something with her mind to prevent the worst part of those attacks. So when the first symptoms started to appear, she peeled this textile. Now I'm missing the word in English, but yeah, this kind of velvety substance that was between her brain and her skull, removed it, and she felt a relief. And when the attack came, the intensity was lower, so much so that she was able to reduce her anti-pain medication. I think I'm talking about this example because I think that in a very practical way exemplifies what you were talking about, Steven. So you basically allow the person to see the pain and more generally the sensation of their body as a point to begin the work, as materials that you can work with, basically. And another case that comes to mind, this happened actually in a psychedelic context, so during a high-dose psilocybin ceremony, in which this person, she is in her 50s, and she's been suffering for several years about chronic pain related to two main conditions. One was fibromyalgia, and the other one was endometriosis. What happened there was that when she reached menopause, the intensity of this pain really went down. That's what she reported. But when she took the psilocybin, at some point during the trip, I think it was about 2 hours, 3 hours in, she experienced a re-exacerbation of the pain. What she told was that when she took the psilocybin, it was as if all that pain that she felt during her teenage years and her years in 20s came back full speed. And thanks to the help of the facilitators and of some work that she was able to carry on, she went through the pain until the pain subsided. And I mean, don't misunderstand me. It was a painful experience. It wasn't easy. But the result of that experience in the coming days, so in the integration phase of this work, was that her general level of pain that was caused by fibromyalgia, because I didn't specify this, I'm sorry, but the pain that she felt subsided after menopause was the endometriosis pain. Well, the fibromyalgia pain was improving because she's done a lot of work on herself, but also had this, this background level of pain that, especially in the morning, became more prominent and was impacting her life. So the effect of this experience was that she felt a perceivable reduction in the background pain, especially in the morning, and it opened up some psychological horizons that could be explored, related to themes bound to femininity and to motherhood, to sisterhood, and all these issues that she then worked on in therapy. I hope this shows that, of course, pain is an event that happens and disrupts daily life, but it is also a point from which you can start to work on it, to change the physical perceptions of it, and also to use it as a seed to further your personal development as a human being. There is also a third case that I could mention that will likely be published in the coming month. It's a case study that we carried out together with some colleagues at the Department of Neuropsychology and Psychopharmacology in Maastricht. It's a case of a fibromyalgia patient who went through a psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy program based on acceptance and commitment therapy that basically, thanks to the program, realized that fibromyalgia was something that was pushing him to pay attention to some very fundamental aspects of his life. And this resulted in very radical life changes that sensibly improved his quality of life and his relationship to fibromyalgia and his pain levels. Now, I've talked a lot, but I think these examples really talk about what you were saying. Pain is a point to start a process, and people have control over their physical perceptions, and there are very practical things they can do to achieve that thing, and to use it as a trampoline towards existential fulfillment.
That's amazing. Yeah, thank you for sharing. In this context, I would then also be curious, so what makes psychedelics so special, quote unquote, in the treatment of pain? So now you referenced a lot of, let's say, alterations in consciousness and how people were able to engage with the sensation of pain in a new way. But to me, this kind of implies more of the efficacy of high-dose psychedelic sessions versus microdosing, because with the microdosing, you don't have the psychological alteration in consciousness. So, yes, your thoughts on the role of psychedelics in the treatment of pain, and then also the macrodosing dichotomy.
Yeah, so let's start with just to complete this part on the full doses. And of course, I must reveal that I've been a psychotherapist for a long time, and so I may have a bias towards works that put existential issues in the center. So that's why I'm gravitating towards full doses. And to finish the talk on full doses, that's basically biggest promise that I see in psychedelic therapy for pain when it comes to full doses is that they bring existential issues to the forefront, and that by making pain more vivid, more manipulable, they make it more prone to changes that are directed by the participant. Moving on to the microdosing part. And so leaving behind formal psychotherapy interventions, I believe there is promise there. And this belief is based both on research conducted in the lab that, if you want, we can talk about research that was already conducted and published, and research conducted with the community of psychedelic users who spontaneously take psychedelics, sometimes with the intention to reduce pain, or sometimes just for their own other purposes, and only afterwards they realize that their pain levels actually went down. The first research that I would like to mention is a paper by the head of our section, Jan Ramakers. He published in 2021 a paper in which they tested 3 different small doses of LSD on healthy volunteers to check whether their tolerance to pain could improve as a consequence of the assumption. They tested 3 doses, and the one that they found the most effective to increase pain tolerance in participants was 20 micrograms. Which is a small dose. As anyone who has had experience with psychedelics, they know that the alteration in consciousness that 20 micrograms give is perceivable, but it's like pretty mild. The internet is full of accounts of people who can function with 20 micrograms, and so what they found was that experimentally induced pain, they basically used a bucket of ice water to produce pain in the hand of a participant. They basically asked them, and that's what we will do in our upcoming study, by the way. So they asked the participant to submerge their hand in ice cold water and to keep it there as long as they can. Ice cold water, for those who don't know, produce a very strong cold sensation. No surprise when you submerge the hand, but also after a while it becomes pain, it's a very reliable and tried and tested way to test for pain tolerance in research. Long story short, they found that compared to placebo, 20 micrograms of LSD increased pain tolerance in these participants. In the lab, we also published a paper of which I am first author, in which we replicated a similar design with this time administering 15 micrograms of LSD. So we were trying to find the minimal dose in which the pain perception the pain tolerance would improve after psychedelic administration. And we found possibly weaker results because we had some unexpected response to the test. So just to make it short, about half of our samples, about half of our participants turned out to be extremely pain resistant. This is one of those things that you really don't wish happened in your research. And so our signal became really, really small. Still, with these happenstances that we're still trying to work out why they were so pain resistant, we were able to find some effects, especially on the unpleasantness component of pain. People felt that the experience was less unpleasant when they took 15 micrograms. So concerning microdoses, these are the main findings I would like to cite. There is also an old study in the 70s that tried to treat phantom limb pain with what they call the small doses of LSD, but I'm going by memory here, so don't quote me on this, but I think it was 50 micrograms with repeated doses, and they found also a reduction in pain there. So these are the pieces of lab research that was done and that shows promise from smaller doses. And I must say that also some population research, some survey research that we conducted in the lab, 2 papers in particular, one over which the first author was Valerie Bonnell in 2022, and the following year another one in which I was first author. We demonstrated that people who spontaneously use small doses of psychedelic tend to achieve comparable results that they get from conventional medications with microdosing. And this was a population of chronic pain patients. We also went deeper to see in what kind of condition the response was stronger. And we found that, for example, in fibromyalgia, arthritis, tension-type headache, and migraine, microdosing was either comparable to conventional medication in terms of self-reported relief or better than conventional medication. And these survey studies granted that we could then push the research forward and bring these observations to the lab to see if they hold up and if we can use them to bring relief to chronic pain sufferers.
May I go back to the study you mentioned with the cold water immersion?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
I think the one that you mentioned that had a sort of paradoxical effect of too many people being pain resistant. If it was the microdosing study that was also facilitated in late 2020, I think I may have been a participant.
Oh, okay.
And I was actually thinking back of this experiment, and already at the time I was curious about it. So what occurred to me was that, so especially when we think about the difference of, let's say, this experiment sort of trying to reproduce isolated pain versus the experience of somebody actually suffering from fibromyalgia, for example, is the attribution of where the pain is coming from. Because I think it's going to be a way more psychologically taxing to feel that, okay, this is coming from my body versus, okay, I'm now putting my hand in the water and it's almost like a game of me trying to have my hand in the water as long as possible. So actually, I've been doing the sort of Wim Hof cold shower thing for some time before then, before joining the study. So I feel that also in terms of pain coming from cold water, you can train yourself to be more resistant to it. And then I actually really remember that the, let's say, social awkwardness of me standing there and not knowing if I will stand there for the entire day if I don't pull my hand out was more present in my mind than the sensation of the cold water on my hand. I actually felt it getting warmer at some point. And then I was like, okay, am I going to just say, okay, like I'm taking it out? But then I think there was a ceiling where they said, okay, you did the maximum amount of time.
So you're one of those pesky pain-resistant participants.
Apparently. Apparently. I apologize for messing up the data set.
Just pulling your legs, Steven. And but thank you for your question, because this is, again, at the center of what we're doing. So if I got this right, you were interested to know what's the difference between doing a study on chronic pain patients and healthy volunteers that have pain experimentally induced with them, and then some points about the social pressure that can build up during experiments. We are aware of these issues, and for example, in our psilocybin study that is going to start recruiting hopefully next week, we took some measures to prevent those things. But let's proceed with order. So you raise a good point. Chronic pain is completely different than acute pain, and it's completely different than experimentally induced acute pain. Because if you were, like, for example, in a emergency room, a situation in which I have very severe acute pain, I would be extremely motivated for that pain to go away. And as you can imagine, that plays a role in pain management. While if I'm just, some of our participants are students that are interested in what's going on in the lab, so they sign up to be participants, and that's amazing. But as you can imagine, the emotional load of just this experimental induced pain is completely different. So let's put some clarity there. First of all, while the situation is completely different between acute pain, experimental induced acute pain, and chronic pain, there are some things that still are very useful to observe, because we know that people that have chronic pain not only tend to have chronic pain, like tend to feel the pain, quote unquote, constantly during their life, or for long stretches of times, like for hours during the day or for days. We also know that most of them suffer from a phenomenon that's called hyperalgesia, which means that stimuli that usually don't produce pain, like pressure stimuli, for them are painful. So if we find a way to increase pain tolerance, there is a chance that those same mechanisms are generalizable to the chronic pain population. To cut this short, if I manage to increase your pain tolerance, and I'm talking of you as a healthy volunteer, that same mechanism may work for people with chronic pain who suffer from hyperalgesia. The second point I want to make is that before involving, and this is crucial, before involving chronic pain patients in an experiment that will likely take long hours because it's a psychedelic experiment, and that will increase to the load of their of a daily functioning that sometimes is pretty challenging, we need to have some grounds. We need to justify that kind of emotional, energetic, sometimes economical investment. So we need preliminary results before involving chronic pain patients. So that said, once these parts are clear and are cleared out, the only research that could help these chronic pain patients is clinical research on chronic pain patients. There is a world in which we find extremely promising results with healthy volunteer, and nothing works for the chronic pain patients. Now I'm painting a bleak picture. Actually, we have encouraging data with chronic pain patients. For example, there were studies by Emanuel Schindler that were very interesting. They administered psilocybin to migraine patients, and they saw interesting results, improvements in pain levels and frequency of attacks. So the situation is not bleak, but just to keep the methodological rigor as high as possible until we can reliably produce relief from the actual chronic pain that the patients are feeling, we cannot be too optimistic about this, and we are only at the beginning phases of the work. Finally, as you hinted at, chronic pain is more emotionally salient. It moves emotional energies in a very powerful way. This means that, of course, it means that for some people, if I just give a substance, a drug that reduces pain, they may get very good results, they may be satisfied. But for some, it will be, my hypothesis is it will be very important to change the relationship to pain in order to facilitate the psychopharmacological effect in the context, for example, of a microdosing-based therapy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Concerning your methodological concerns, we are taking steps to prevent that. For example, we are taking steps to reduce the pressure of experimental expectation on pain, because we know that expectation play a big role in how much you perceive pain, and to make sure that the pain-evoking tasks that we are administering are super reliable, so that we know that temperature is always the same, that we know that in the majority of the population who doesn't have your impressive pain resistance, the procedure will be successful in engendering pain. And you also mentioned another methodological point that is that I'm blanking on now. Maybe it will come back and we can discuss it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, the warming up of the hand. Yeah, we're aware of that effect. What happens is that if the hand is very still in cold water, beside the pain resistance, what happens is that a very thin layer of warm water builds up around the hand, and so the person starts feeling a warmer temperature. But to do that, since we are sadistic experimenters, we will keep moving the water around so that the temperature around the hand will remain constant.
I see. Very good. Do you also have some hypotheses, intuitions on how the research with psychedelics as a treatment for chronic pain will actually help us understand more about the underlying causes of chronic pain? Because I would assume that our body is giving us pain sensations to tell us something is wrong. So it seems to me that in chronic pain patients, there is this constant signaling of, hey, that there's something wrong. Maybe it's inflammation. I also read, I think from Kim Kuipers, she wrote something about microdosing, reducing inflammation in the nervous system. So yeah, and then perhaps also that there might be different kinds of chronic pain where psychedelics work and where they don't work based on the underlying factors. So I would be curious if you have any intuitions on getting more insights into the actual quote-unquote disease.
Yeah, so let's start with the last point you mentioned concerning the specificity. So how specific is pain therapy with psychedelics, and to what conditions we may expect them to work better? And the answer is nobody knows, Steven, at the moment. Nobody knows. It's too early to say. The only thing we can say is data that comes from either very isolated clinical trials on, for example, migraine patients, that was supported by the spectacular work that the Cluster Buster group did back in the early 2000s. So we know that, again, for example, migraine, psilocybin can help. We know that from an experimental study, from a clinical study. The other data that we can mention are survey data that I mentioned before. So we know that, for example, both full doses and microdoses can achieve comparable relief levels compared to conventional medications in conditions such as fibromyalgia, arthritis, tension type headache, and migraine, but these are survey data, so we need to treat them with caution. In terms of the specificity on what psychedelics could work on, the first part of your question was more about mechanisms, if I understood correctly. So why does it work? We talked a little bit about the potential psychological mechanisms, but if we move to the more biological one, neurological one, the more systemic one, let's say, chronic pain patients, most of chronic pain conditions have this factor in common. They tend to carry high degrees of systemic inflammation, just as it's been observed in several psychiatric conditions, mental health conditions. There's lots of literature on depression and on other psychiatric conditions. And this idea that part of the therapeutic effects, both in the mental health area and potentially in the pain area, most of these effects may be, I don't know if it's most, but some of these effects can be attributed to a general lowering of the inflammatory load on the body. So much so that in our upcoming study, we've been we will monitor inflammatory biomarkers to make sure that we have control also on that variable. So one big part is inflammation. The second one, to which you also hinted upon, relies on neuroplasticity, on potential neuroplastic changes that psychedelics may engender. So chronic pain today is conceptualized on the more medical level, on the more biological level, as an abnormal firing of certain pain-related areas that keep firing even though there is no quote-unquote harm done to the subject, no biological damage done to the 20 tissue. So the idea is that through mechanisms that relate to long-term potentiation, those networks basically lose the capacity of remaining inactivated for extended periods of time. And that translates phenomenologically into chronic pain. So this caught the attention of pain researcher, the fact that psychedelics can induce neuroplasticity, because that carries the promise of normalizing this abnormal firing and restoring the pain response back to a more functional more functional state, to more functional function. I'm sorry, I don't know how else to say this. Yeah, so these are the main hypotheses on the biological part. And if we consider that all these mechanisms may be activated at the same time when you take psychedelics, so the more meaning-based, the more meaning-based mechanisms, the mechanisms related to the ability to intervene on the physical sensations to change it. And if we pair this with all these more biological cascade of events, we may be witnessing a multi-mechanism treatment that ultimately will improve the well-being of patients. I was distracted before because I was thinking about this other experience we had in a lab for a completely different reason. It was incidental, but still very interesting. We were, as you may know, at the lab right now, we're running under the guidance of Professor Natasha Mason, a study on couples. We are administering them with 50 micrograms of LSD and hooking them up to hyperscanning. So we are hooking both people up with EEG devices that allows us to record the electrical brain activity during tasks that involves I don't know, romantic connection between the partners, or cooperation, or intimacy, etc., empathy, and other variables. And there was this time in which this person came in, and he was a migraine sufferer, and he told us that right in the moment in which he was administered the drug, and I'm saying this just to say that the coming of the pain that he reported was likely unrelated to the drug itself. It was just an unfortunate happenstance. So he started feeling the initial symptoms of a headache attack coming. And as the effect of the LSD started to come to 50 micrograms, again, it's not traditionally considered the full dose. It is considered, again, traditionally, conventionally, half a dose. So I'm saying this because the effects of consciousness on consciousness are noticeable. He started feeling that the pain was growing. The effect of the substance was growing, but the pain wasn't an actual pain. It wasn't properly painful. And we know this because after the test day, we conducted an interview to structure a qualitative study on this case because it was so interesting. So what happened was that he started perceiving this pain as if it was a shadow running from his neck to his shoulder. And that shadow was there, so he felt it, but it wasn't pain. And he felt that shadow was more vivid. It was like it was more present. I would say more manipulable, more controllable. You could act upon it. And interestingly enough, at the end of the study day, he reported that the pain never got to the level that it usually goes to, and that the amount of hours he was in pain was comparable to the normal duration of his attacks. But after the attacks was gone, after the attacks are usually gone, I mean, the level of pain was way lower than he was accustomed to. So what I'm saying is that when the attack subsided, usually he felt more pain, but in that case in which he took psychedelics, the pain was lower even in the hours following the subsiding of the effect of psychedelics. So And this may be the result of the interaction between biological mechanisms and psychological mechanisms. As we know, high degrees of anxiety and specifically the perception of having no control on your pain increases the perception of pain. So part of the research will be disentangle the effects of these different mechanisms to see if they are all legit, so if they all contribute to pain reduction, and if they all contribute to pain reduction, how should we emphasize each of these components. And as you can imagine, we cannot just differentiate between psychological and biological. We should also get deeper in understanding what's the influence of the perception of control, what's the influence of the emotional state, what's the influence of psychological techniques that can be used during the pain attack, etc. So we can get very granular both on the psychological and on the biological side.
Yeah. What occurred to me after you sharing these anecdotes is that it seems that people are able to create more space, conscious space between themselves and the sensation of the pain. That was something I always wondered about because psychedelics, they make you in a way more sensitive. At least that's part of it. So I found it the first time I was hearing that people use psychedelics to treat pain, I was like, okay, but it might also make you more sensitive to the sensation of pain, right? But what I'm hearing now is that it might have the ability to create just more space, make you more aware of everything that is not the pain, and thereby the pain seems smaller.
I mean, that it will be interesting to explore this hypothesis, definitely. So, and one characteristic of chronic pain is that it tends to suck up all of your life. So, especially in severe cases, there is nothing else except pain. So the ability to detach from pain and to take in the world as it is in all its complexity, yes, that could help. Or mechanisms that are related, for example, to attention, so that my attention is not completely absorbed by that. We know that attention can increase pain.
Yeah. There's also one study I came across a long time ago, but it came up again when I was thinking about this topic. It's by Moseley et al. From 2002. And it basically, there were people suffering from arthritis and they underwent knee surgery, and they had 3 different groups. So 2 of them were testing 2 different surgical procedures, and one of them was just a placebo group. So people, they had an incision made, but no actual surgical procedure was performed. And there they found basically no difference between the placebo surgery and the real surgeries, which is, quite baffling, because especially in terms of knee pain, you would assume that it's a very mechanical phenomenon, that the knee plate like rubs in a certain way that produces the pain. But even there, the quote-unquote placebo effect, the effect of belief, had such a strong effect. So that makes me also think about the psychedelic space, and especially microdosing. There's all this debate of, is it placebo, is it not placebo? But maybe we need to look deeper into what actually placebo really means. So just because the beliefs basically go a lot deeper and shape our perception of everything in very profound ways that we're kind of discrediting by just saying, placebo equals to it doesn't work.
Yeah, so concerning this last point, I think that contrary to many other areas in science, we know what placebo effect is. We can describe it very precisely. It is nothing else than the effect of expectation and setting on some sort of dependent variable. This doesn't mean that we completely understood the placebo effect, of course, but we know, like phenomenologically, how it works. The real question to me, and this is just my perspective, is how can we harness this? How can we create models that are specifically honed to leverage the power of expectation in an ethical way. So that also the work declare they are placebo. There is an interesting research line concerning non-deceptive placebos, in which I tell you that placebo can have a very interesting effect on your condition. Here is the placebo. I give you the placebo works. So I think that what we should be working on, and I'm a clinician, so I'm sorry, but that's my bias, is how do we optimize these findings that we made in the lab so that they are useful to patients. And if you allow me, I would also like to expand a little bit on the therapeutic approach, on the therapeutic mechanisms, because you said sometimes it's a matter of taking in the whole reality and not just focus on pain. Yes, but we must also say that pain gives rise to a very specific psychological mechanism, which is pain avoidance. For example, people who suffer from chronic pain stop doing any activity that will even remotely, that even for a remote chance will lead them to experience pain. And this tells us that their psychological system is responding differently to pain. So they are not fully immersed in pain. They are not a victim of their pain because the pain is absorbing of their attention. It's quite the opposite. They are avoiding pain so much so that they are cutting off other parts of their life and making their reality grow smaller. So with some patients, the movement is exactly the opposite. We're going to look at the pain, we're going to enter the pain, and we're going to traverse the pain, which, believe me, for someone who suffers from chronic pain, it's terrifying, the idea. But also, for some people, it's the way out. So it's the way for which, once I do this, I can feel I have control over my pain, and even if the pain doesn't completely subside, sometimes it completely subsides after a combination of pharmacotherapy and psychotherapy. Sometimes it is still there with lower intensity and with lower impact. So again, when we are dealing with people, it is very important that we take into consideration the whole person, because these ways to respond to any unpleasant stimuli, to any painful stimuli, to any suffering, is rooted on our, of course, temperament, etc., but also on our personal history, on our family history, on the legacies that we got from our parents, of the promises and of the general relational styles that we inherited from our past generations.
Yeah, you're right. It's fascinating to look at the different ways in which it can work, and it's always, it's teaching us a lot about ourselves.
Most
I would
definitely.
like to zoom out a bit. So you're from Italy, right? And
yeah, from Sicily.
Yes, and I know that in Italy, the, let's say, drug policy and also attitudes towards drugs are quite different than in the Netherlands. So since you're doing a joint PhD, you kind of have a foot in both worlds. I'd be curious about your experience of how easy it is to talk about your work in the Netherlands versus in Italy.
You know, Steven, I don't get to talk this very often, but the perspective changed really quickly. Like in the course of my PhD, I could see a very rapid change in perspective towards psychedelics, psychedelic therapy, etc. So when I first started talking to people to understand if there was interest, I was doing anything that a prospective PhD student does, basically looking for money. So I was going around and pitching the project to some people, saying that I had contacts with some foreign universities that would be willing to accept me as long as I get the money, etc., the dirty work. And I kid you not, I found many department heads and professors in the area of mental health that literally told me that they didn't want to do this work because they didn't want to work with drug addicts. And the implication of this was not that they didn't want to run a psychedelic study to treat addictions. Their assumption was that anyone who's using any kind of substance to alter the state of consciousness is clearly a substance addiction. So this was at the beginning of my PhD. I was lucky enough to find other academic institutions that were very open to this because they recognized the potential and they were able to read the literature, to understand the science, and to see that there was promise in this field, specifically in the University of Messina. And over the years, I saw that people started getting more and more interested. So it is really changed. Once when I was like in my first year, when I talked about research also with fellow researchers from Italy, I really had to explain from the beginning, from the 60s, the early studies, the war on drugs, and administration, etc., etc. Now it's become part of the zeitgeist. People know this, and they ask me. It is not I that I have to introduce the topic anymore. So big changes. And while politically the current climate may be against this kind of revolutionary therapies, or I shouldn't say revolutionary, but promising therapies, I also think that there is a big economic incentive and a big incentive in terms of providing wellness to people, and that is appealing to any part of the political spectrum. If I can make sure that my population is healthier, that means lower expenses from public healthcare systems. And as you know, in Italy, we have a pretty strong public healthcare system. And it means that we would be able to attract, for example, investments, because psychedelics are also an opportunity for investment. And I think that where there are, also in cases in which the political climate is a little bit, let's say, conservative, there are forces at play that may promote the dissemination of these new approaches, because literally everyone has to gain from this. Everyone has to gain from successful research, and everyone should be able to reap the gains of this research. That, by the way, in Italy is also often publicly funded. So it would be great if the public would benefit from the results that are created every day by researchers in my country and all over the world, actually.
Yeah, it's great to hear that in such a short time period, a lot can shift indeed.
And if I may add something, I come from Sicily, which is an island in the middle of the Mediterranean, and we've had so many cultural influences, and one of the strongest was the Greek influence. So it would be so nice to be able also to make a greater cultural mark, and make sure that people that come from those backgrounds, we connect with their roots that are so inextricably linked with also psychedelic practices, psychedelic ceremonies, etc. Murarescu taught us that the old Greek rituals also involved psychedelics, also involved ergotized beer or spiked wine, etc. So it would be really great if we could reconnect with those roots so that we can, of course, still appreciating psychedelic cultures that come from other countries, but if we really believe that setting is so important for the outcomes of any psychedelic interventions, then I think that an intervention that respects the cultural heritage of each one of us could be more profound and more fruitful for end users. In other words, it would be so great to be able to set up experiences in which we discover the Greek rituals related to psychedelics in a land in which a couple of a lot of centuries ago, that was actually probably happening already.
It's super great to hear you say that. It's actually something I also wanted to get at, but consciousness transmitted itself. Because yes, indeed, I think it's a lot about stories and the stories that people have in their minds about psychedelics, and also from the research movement and the Renaissance, we still are very attached to the story that Western psychedelic use started in the 60s. But by telling the story in this way, we might also not show the full picture. And actually, it's a lot more powerful to consider that those psychedelic traditions are very much embedded also in the roots of Western culture, and that Plato and Socrates were attending these mystery rituals, and they were, not just a fringe phenomenon, but at the heart of culture, gives you certainly a different perspective on it.
And to add on this, I'm sorry, but the thought now escaped my mind, but it was important. So it's okay if I take a second to recover it.
Sure.
So, that's what I wanted to say. I am very fond of the shamanic traditions. I've been myself working with shamanic traditions, and I'm talking about shamanic traditions from South America, the whole ayahuasca movement. At the same time, and their spiritual and cultural background. But when I think about our heritage, I know that compared to those cultures which really valued oral traditions and oral dissemination of knowledge, when it comes to Greek culture, we have so much written sources. We know so much about them. We have stories and tragedies and myths and music, and we know what they eat and we know what they drank. We know so much of their political structures. We knew so much about their social structures. We know about their democracy. We knew about how their city-states were working. This means that the reconstruction we could be doing with that would be so precise. We could be talking about the same myths with the same words they were using. So it's just a low-hanging fruit that's been there, and I'm actually working with some colleagues to create a framework to reintroduce in an ethical way, in a respectful way, these concepts to therapy and to experiences related to personal growth and to spiritual growth. It would be nice if we could do the same that the people from South America related to shaman traditions were so great at doing, were so successful at doing, keeping this tradition alive across the centuries. We failed on that miserably. At some point, we lost the connection with those roots. But on our side is the literature, like the classic literature, this time. Mm-hmm. And its value cannot be overstated. That's what I'm trying to say.
Mauro, thank you so much for your time. I think those are great words to close.
It was my pleasure. Our talk. Thank you for having me.
Yes. So really much looking forward for everything that is to come from all the publications and new ideas.
Do you mind if I just add one last part?
Yes, please.
So we are recruiting for the psilocybin study on fibromyalgia. It means that we are looking for people who are suffering from fibromyalgia and would be willing to come to the lab and work with us. They will receive a small dose of psilocybin in 3 different visits, and we will administer tests to them, and it will be a work that will add to our knowledge of psychedelics in pain. So if people are interested in this, they can connect to our website, which is pimaastricht.com, a psychopharmacological section of Maastricht University, and they can find all the information there. And if they want to join, we'd be grateful. Science would be grateful, and hopefully we can bring some relief to people who are suffering.
Amazing. All right, Mauro. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Steven.
Take care.
You too.